Yes, good morning. We've got a fantastic panel this morning, really exciting group of speakers on tech-positive regulation and how it can turbocharge growth and innovation in the economy. I'm Anthony Thompson, Managing Partner of 56 Degrees North, specialist policy and communications consultancy, working with a bunch of fantastic fintechs and incumbent players. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves when they're answering questions so that we don't spend too much time on that. But before we jump in, I thought I would just cover a couple of points just to frame what we're talking about today. Typically, the regulators, Bank of England, have had a technology agnostic approach to regulation. But with the government's emphasis on growth and innovation, we're seeing the regulators adapt their approach and using technology in line with their new objectives to promote growth, innovation, and international competitiveness. And we'll all have heard the government's package of measures on payments regulations this morning to drive further innovation. I'm sure Colin in particular is going to touch on this, but the FCA has launched numerous initiatives in this space, and it really feels like regulatory experimentation is becoming a core capability rather than the exception, which is great to see, particularly as AI capabilities are rapidly scaling, and we've seen Anthropic's Mythos launched, and it's really crucial in that sort of context that the regulatory system understands and engages with the evolving approach. So the questions we're going to be looking at today are, what does the regulators' pivot to tech positive mean in practice for those in the industry looking to leverage it? Are the current regulatory boundaries in financial services fit, such as compliance or tackling issues like fraud? And we've got some real genuine experts on the panel around that. And ultimately, how do we make the UK more competitive and turbocharge growth, as the Economic Secretary was outlining this morning? So, without further ado, if I can just go through the panelists quickly with some questions. Victoria, I'm going to start with you. What role should the government play in building the skills and capabilities needed for an increasingly digital and AI-driven economy? Where do you think regulation can actively help? And where are the risks of it actually holding back progress?
So first of all, thank you so much for having us here today. So I'm Victoria Collins. I am the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for science, innovation and technology. So that's my angle on this, is really how can we help to keep that kind of world-leading stance of innovation in the UK, but do much better, and we need to do much better on that. I also find it such a privilege being in this role. I had my own tech company before I went into politics, and I chose politics, but this way I'm able to bring a little bit of that back into the work that I'm doing. There you talk about skills. I mean, we've been working a lot on, we've worked with over 100 stakeholders in AI, leading stakeholders, say what change needs to happen. And for me, there's kind of two core principles: is embrace that change. The government need to embrace that change and embrace lifelong learning. So some of the key ideas we've put forward is a national people strategy. Really think about this right to the core. The second thing is things like skills tax credit. You know, building skills is going to be something that's essential. We all know how many features are changing, how that is changing. But then the third thing is also we have this principle of a lifelong training grant that actually other countries like France have as well, to say that actually as individuals you should be empowered to retrain. So there's so much that can be done to embrace that change and embrace that long-term change, because it is just going to be about adapting. In terms of regulation, for us as well, it's like, and I just absolutely love the outline of the talk today, because regulation shouldn't, or it's seen as this kind of trauma word almost, especially in the world of innovation, but doing it right should absolutely be about unlocking that. So it's really about setting the incentives, so the right incentives, whether that's around scaling up, investing, whether it's about upskilling. There's an element as well about, I really believe in stopping that race to that bottom. In the UK, we have this leading place of being trustworthy, about quality. You know, UK law is respected around the world. We should really embrace that, especially when it comes to fintech. We have an incredible fintech industry here, but helping set that foundation of trust is something regulation can do. But I also believe in those adaptable standards. And I think just with the risk is, I think it's about helping We need to make sure that we unlock that adaptability. So that's why I think about that adaptable standards, but making sure that we keep trust really core, because whether it comes to decisions, whether it comes to our data, people will have trust the industry, will use it, and will help it grow.
And if I may, just a follow-up, how do you feel, where do you think we are in terms of that balance between consumer trust and consumer protection and pushing the boundaries around innovation and new technology?
I mean, from an AI perspective, I mean, this is, because obviously that's an element I look into a lot. It's also obviously in fintech, it's how do you bring AI into fintech as a service. There are many, I mean, in this room, for us, there are those that we embrace it, we think it's great. Not everyone feels that way. And actually, in terms of adoption, many of you may know, actually a lot of SMEs, we're behind in the UK compared to some of our European partners in terms of actually the population taking up AI. There is a real distrust there where many people are not using it or afraid of it. And so that's where I think it's really important to get that balance right, to help adoption, which is ultimately good for society and good for business.
Yeah, Colin, if I can turn to you, you're really at the coalface of trying to get that balance right. And I think I'm right in saying FCA was the first regulator really to talk explicitly about tech positive. So do you want to say a few words about what that means in practice and the progress you feel you're making, but where we need to make more?
Yeah, of course. I'm Colin Payne. I'm the head of innovation at the FCA. And I feel we should have a TM on the tech neutral to tech positive. Yeah, we were the first. Our strategy published last year, page 13, started talking about tech positive. Of course, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So a lot of our role is to clarify that. But you'll know that the FCA has got a long heritage of innovation. The team has been doing incredible work, being the first with the regulatory sandbox in the world, the first with a digital platform in the world to accompany the sandbox, and the first to lean into AI. So your point's very well made. The FCA has done an extraordinary job of identifying trends, leaning into them, and then providing the environments and ecosystems that actually all of those in this room can come and use with no charge. The idea is to unlock the opportunity. That's what we do. Innovation is all about the vision and bringing the value up to that vision. And my team, we have the best team in the world, no question, and we offer the best services in the world. And that should be something the UK is rightly proud of. When we lean into AI, we've just announced, I think in the last 5 minutes on the main stage, that we're moving to our new cohort for the AI Lab. It will be focused on agentic. It's been an incredibly popular new service that we launched a year and a half ago. And I'd say regulators around the world are watching us now. I mean, they are watching with some kind of envy that we've got the most amazing fintech community. We've got a great government, and I think generally the government ecosystem. So all parties, I'm not talking about specifically the one in power, but all parties have really adopted a positive approach to technology as well. They see the benefit. Of course we have to balance risk and benefit. Of course we do. Our job is to ensure that consumers, as you rightly say, Victoria, some are adopting enthusiastically, others are very, very concerned. We have to monitor that. But I can absolutely assure you, the job of the regulator is to do both those things. It's to lean in, look at the consumer, look at the risks involved, balance those with the benefits and opportunities, and then engage with this community to make sure we do it responsibly. That's what we're doing.
And just a quick follow-up, that leadership role, who do you see as your competitors? Because being at the top of the pile, you'll have people who are looking to learn from you, but they're also looking to get a leg up on us.
Yeah, we're very lucky. I'm the chair of GFIN, which is the Global Financial Innovation Network. We've got 98 members, so these are 98 regulators around the world who work with us. So we don't really think of this as a competition per se. Of course, we want the UK to be the best by quality, and we can measure that. And we've seen measurement now through investment and through support and through numbers of unicorns, fintechs, and so on. So when we look at it, we think, okay, how can we best mobilize and optimize the UK for the ecosystem? Scale-up unit's another great example. Again, I think we're the first in the world to do a scale-up unit specifically to help scale activities. So when I look at other regulators, let's not call them competition. We work with Singapore. We work with Saudi Arabia, SAMA. We work with all the best regulators in the world because it's a global community. If we don't think about interoperability and we don't think about global standards, then we're missing the trick completely. We have to work with them. It's not a competition in that respect.
That's a really great point. Kirsty, if I can turn to you. Colin's talked about the capabilities are built within the FCA. What do you think firms need to be doing to build their capabilities and move forward at the kind of pace that everybody's expecting them to?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Kirsty Rutter, and I run the corporate venture team at Lloyds Bank. So we make investments in seed to Series B companies that will support and accelerate the Lloyds strategy while at the same time offering growth to the companies we invest in. I built the capability in the team because I think in systems. I've been in banking for almost 30 years. Don't hold that against me. And banking is itself a system that unlocks value. What I am a strong believer in is that you've both talked about it actually, is community and system. So the fintech community is unlike anything else I've ever been part of. It's a place where it's healthy competition, but it's partnership. It feels quite different being in this community than maybe in some large corporates. And I think the challenge as we enter into this new technology space, which is moving so fast, is that we have to look at it systematically. If it goes from everything from how do we operate as a firm? How do the consumers want to receive their engagement? How do we educate our children? Because the whole system is going to have to adapt. Rote learning data facts when you can just plug it into a system is not what's going to make you successful. You need to learn to think. So how are we going to adapt the education system to support what's coming and in some ways is what's already here? I think some of the challenges we face is as we move into a more digital environment, we pride ourselves on the principles base that we operate our regulation, our legal system on, but in digital land, we operate in ones and zeros. So there's an adaptability there. It's an opportunity, it's also a challenge where it's not a clear-cut rule. You can't say yes or no, right? You've got to apply your appetite and your opportunity to it, but that's going to be interesting for us to all lean into. And from a regulatory perspective, I think there's an opportunity for us to consider whether, does the regulator need its own AI bot? Like how are you going to regulate a firm's AI without your own AI? I mean, it's fascinating, right? But again, it's a whole model. It's the whole system that has to adapt.
Do you think the pace of change now is almost forcing a maturity or a maturing of partnership within the ecosystem? I mean, I remember back in the financial crisis days, post-financial crisis, and fintech started up, it was very much us and them mentality, particularly from the incumbent side, has to be said, where I was at the time. But are you seeing that partnership maturing now, and is that forced by technology?
So I think the reality is you've got to move so fast. It's not possible for you to be able to service everything. And if we come back to the system, we're all members of the system, so how do we collegiately come together to offer what the consumer needs? I think from an educational perspective as well, there's a lot of experimentation that's happening. At Lloyds, we recently went out in the market with our experiment in quantum with IBM and looking at fraud and mules and how successful that's been. That's just the start of the kind of stuff we need to be doing that's supporting everybody in the system. And then from an education perspective, there's a whole regime now operating internally. I was just sharing with the rest of the panel, I'm off to Cambridge tomorrow and Thursday because I'm at AI school, because the leadership team need to know what they're dealing with and watch this space. I'll probably get myself a project and end up having to do something. But unless you're touching it and you're dealing with it, you don't understand it. You've got to be in it.
Yeah, well, you should grab Charles for 10 minutes afterwards. So, Charles, if I kind of turn to you on AI, as AI capabilities are rapidly advancing, and given your focus, how are you seeing this intersection between regulation and AI?
Thanks for the intro. So, ComplyAdvantage, we work with 3,000 fintechs, banks, payment companies, corporates all over the world. And I started the company 11 years ago. We've since raised $150 million. We're going to have 100 million revenue now. And the biggest challenge for every bank, payment company, fintech, I think still today, is the risk of money laundering, terrorist financing, sanctions, fraud. And for me, the answer back then was AI. And I think in the past 3 years, we've seen more change in AI and how that impacts regulation than ever before. So, for instance, now the big issue, as Colin alluded to, was the rollout of agents. So we have now roughly $2 billion of labor spend on the platform, and increasingly we are deploying agents which can work faster, harder, better, more accurately, and more relentlessly than any human can. And so I guess the big question now is how will the FCA, how will the MAS, how will regulators around the world react to this rollout, given how profound it is? And hopefully we can avoid big fines or scandals in 3 years' time when the real results of that come to roost, I think.
And have you got a perspective on how the regulator can specifically keep up with the pace of change?
So I think what we've seen is clients, given how closely they often work with regulators, is roll this out very, very slowly and very, very carefully, really test, benchmark, A/B test. And I think what we've done is iterate over the past few months on different agents, different deployment models, and the results are so starkly better than the humans, and the cost is so relentlessly lower that I think increasingly regulators, compliance officers, bank CEOs all recognize that this is clearly the future. So I think there's hesitancy given how profound the shift is, but also acceptance given the improvement and cost reduction.
Yeah, great. And James, if I can turn to you finally. We've got 7 minutes left, I see. And we've still got another question to come.
No pressure.
As a founder, just bringing it back to the nuts and bolts, how can UK regulation be agile enough to protect the consumer whilst avoiding over-regulation or stifling innovation? You must be wrestling with that all day long as founder and CEO.
Yeah, so hi everyone, pleasure to be here. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Bumper. We are Europe's largest payment platform built specifically for the automotive industry. So we're in about 6,000 dealers across Europe. We'll process about £5 to £6 billion worth of payments this year. Our investors include Porsche, Jaguar Land Rover, Suzuki. In the UK, which is our core market, we got our FCA consumer credit license back in October. So I guess we're got a good perspective on that experience, and we're also starting our regulatory journey right across Europe. Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, you know, a good regulator is a moat against bad players, but at the same time, not a barrier to entry for new entrants. And yeah, I think one of my concerns with the new EU AI regulation coming in is potential some of the costs. I mean, my friend Claude gave me some of the stats around it. But apparently it could cost SMEs, particularly high-risk ones, which I think most fintechs would probably fall in that category, anywhere up to kind of €600,000 a year of implementation, setup, and regulatory costs. So if you're a Lloyds, that's not even a rounding error. But actually, if you're a new startup, that is huge amounts of money to have to find. That obviously isn't going into innovation and building a product. It's kind of ticking boxes. And clearly, good regulation is vitally important, but it needs to be proportionate for enabling innovation. And I think our challenge in Europe, if we're being honest, one of my favorite quotes is, "The US innovates, China imitates, and the EU regulates." And we've had a lot of regulation in Europe, and the last 25 years, I think the EU has grown 13%, the US has grown nearly 90%. So it's how do we use it as a benefit and not slowing down industry and innovation and startups.
Maybe just to extend that point, are you seeing EU regulation trying to catch up with the UK, or are you seeing it being differentiated? What's the experience between the two?
Well, I mean, our core product is buy now, pay later, and yeah, the FCA ahead of that. I mean, I must give a lot of credit to Colin. I've been to a few roundtables, heard him speak, and it's great to have a figurehead who's really driving through innovation, and I think it's a great message to have as a regulator, that obviously there's always a balance to these things. But yeah, the EU, they have a CCD2 regulation coming in November, whereas the FCA will be regulating BNPL in July. So I guess again the FCA is a bit ahead here. And to be fair, some of the challenges with the local regulators in Europe is kind of disproportionate in terms of cost. one of our very close neighbours, much smaller markets, the cost is to get a license there, and the ongoing levies are about 10 times what it is in the UK with a fraction of the market. So, yeah, again, I think there's a lot they could learn from the FCA.
Great. Well, quick fire to finish off. I can see our next speaker waiting in the wings. So we've got 4 or 5 minutes. Just very quick fire. I'll go Charles and then along the line. What's the single policy or regulatory change for technology that could be made that would keep the UK as a really great place to build and scale a business?
Within our wheelhouse, some sort of safe harbour for the use and deployment of agentic AI broadly within money laundering and terrorist financing.
Great.
Wow, that was fast. I go back to first principles. Regulation is always put out there with the best of intentions. There are always consequences, some of them great, some of them not so great. We need to think in systems and think about the knock-on of making changes here and how that flows through the entire economic, societal system.
Great. Victoria.
I'm just going to go big picture to government, which is to think like an entrepreneur. I think they really need to get in, think about whether it's the incentives for growth, whether it's about having those standards, and also just backing British business at the heart of it.
Great, James.
I've got no idea if this is possible, so it's probably one for Colin, perhaps Victoria. Perhaps having like a one-in, one-out rule, so kind of creating discipline, so you're not layering one regulation on top of another, and before you know it, you're drowning in rules and regulations. So kind of giving the regulators the discipline of removing things that aren't important, whether that's having a 7-year sunset clause where, you know, if it's not used, it's automatically removed. No idea if that's possible. But.
Colin.
I was actually still thinking about the UK's position, because you said Europe, China and America. So I guess the UK kind of dominates, accelerates. We do that as fintechers. That's what we do, right? One thing we could do, I think what we're doing at the FCA is bringing together smart data, the Smart Data Accelerator, together with the agentic capabilities. So bringing data and agents together so that it's really clear, synthetic data sets are second to none. And then, as you say, creating safe spaces for the ecosystem to come in and play. That's what we're doing. So I think that's the key on the policy. It's just unlocking. And if that means policy as code in the future, that's what I'd like to drive against. Because I think if we can get policy embedded into the coding that we're doing on the product side, then it becomes that's the question for the agent on the FCA side. We can just lock in. It becomes a machine executable handbook, which is much faster.
That's fantastic. What a great panel and great contributions from everybody. We've got lots of different perspectives in there. I think 3 takeaways from me. I think, Colin, for you and your colleagues, I think you've got huge support for what you're doing. And I suspect, just as EST was asking the industry to come up with ideas, I think if you ever need support from the industry, you've got 4 people here in the rest of the room to push you on. I think that's very, very clear. I think there's really something in the ecosystem we've got here in the UK that we really need to harness and nurture and maintain. And then I think it was Victoria, we talked a little bit about, and Kirsty as well, public attitudes and education and getting the balance right. It is incredibly important that we innovate in regulation, but maintain the standards as well, as James was saying, and Charles as well. So thank you very much, everybody. That's the end of this panel. Really appreciate you coming. Hopefully it was for us and not the next speaker, but I hear he's very good.